What's up everyone, Nader here. In this video, what I'd like to do is go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with events and event listeners in the DOM together. In the previous video, we looked at kind of an introduction to events, how things like the add event listener and remove event listener and all that kind of fun stuff works. So this is meant to be just a whole bunch of fun exercises to get more practice with that, as well as actually a couple of new concepts in there that we didn't have time to go through in the actual kind of introduction video that we will potentially see as we kind of move forward with events in the future. Let's get right to the exercises together. Okay, so as with previous exercises, I have these on GitHub, so feel free to kind of download them from there or view them on there, or you can just pause the video and kind of read through the instructions. They're not particularly long for this video. It's mainly just going to be a lot of thinking and kind of writing this out yourself in the code as we go along. So I'll read out the instructions and then I'll give you a chance to actually work through it yourself so that you can have a chance to actually compare your solution to one that we come up with together. So let's start with a warm-up exercise. So for this one, I'd like you to create an HTML file. This is going to be pretty common across all the kind of exercises that we do, just so we have some scaffolding. It's going to have a head with a title, some text in it, as well as a body tag. And in the body tag, I'd like you to add a button element, and the button element is going to have some text that just says "click me" in it. And the goal is when you click on this button, it's going to kind of console log to the screen "hello." All right, so hopefully you can get your fingers warmed up with that one and get it working. And once you do, we'll go through it together. All right, so to start, let's create a new file here. I'm just going to call this warmup.html. And for these exercises, what I'm going to do is actually kind of, for the most part, write all the JavaScript in script tags alongside the HTML, just keep things kind of self-contained and relatively simple. You can, of course, split them up if you like. So I'm going to create here a doc type of HTML. And then I'm going to create my HTML tags. I'm going to create a head. In the head, I'm going to create a title. I'm just going to call this warm-up exercise. And then after the head, I'll create a body. Now in the body, we said we want a button and we wanted to say click me inside the button, right? So let's just see what this looks like. So I'm going to reveal this in my Finder. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Hopefully you can see that. Double click this to open this in my browser. Super zoom in as well. Open up my dev tools on the side here. Zoom in on that as well. And we can see that we have kind of the markup as we'd expect with our button. So interestingly, as you might imagine, if we click this button, right, it works, but it doesn't actually do anything, right? So console over here, nothing actually ends up happening. So we got to get that to work. So to get that to actually work, we have to add an event listener to this button. Now there's a couple ways to do this. We can actually add an attribute, which is kind of a single event listener, or we can actually dynamically add multiple event listeners using add event listener. I'm just going to go with the former just to keep it simple in this case. Because there's not too much going on in this particular example, but I'll mention some caveats that might become an issue later on. So I'm just going to add an on click. And this is saying when this button gets clicked, right, we want to run some JavaScript code. So what JavaScript code do you want to run in this case? We want to do a console.log in here. And I can't use double quotes because I already used double quotes for the actual attribute here. And I want a console.log, and I already forgot what I'm trying to console log here. We want to say hello. That was an easy one. I should have remembered that. Hello. And just like that, right? So in this case, we're saying for this particular button, right, only this button on the page, when you click it, it's going to run this JavaScript code inside this attribute. So now if I come back to my Chrome and I refresh the page, what we'll see is that now that's an attribute on this button. And lo and behold, if I go to the console and I actually click the button, we will get hello being printed out multiple times, which is quite nice, right? So hopefully you can see that right there. Perfect. Now, just to really clarify what's happening here, imagine if I add another button here and I say click me too, right? This button, if I come back to Chrome and I refresh the page and I have the click me too, if I click the click me to button, nothing happens. If I click the click me button, hello happens. Click me to, nothing happens, and then click me to, right? So they're totally independent of each other because the event listeners are like per element in this case. So we can add the same kind of function for multiple elements, but we have to do that manually. It's not by default. Okay, hopefully that one makes sense. Let's take a look at exercise number 1. So for this one, same thing. I'd like you to create an HTML file, a head and a title in it, put some text in the title, and then add a body tag. So the tricky one with this one is in the body, I want you to add a button again. And this one, the text for this one is going to be show secret. And the goal of this button is to actually toggle a paragraph element into the DOM. So the paragraph element is going to have some text in it, just like any regular paragraph element. A magical portal has opened. But when you click the button, it's going to show the paragraph. And when you click it again, it's going to hide the paragraph if it's already shown, right? So depending on whether the paragraph is there or not, it's going to either show it or hide it respectively, right? So there are multiple ways to do this. In fact, like just a very large number of ways to do this. I would love you to try kind of a few different versions if you like. They vary from quite simple all the way to a bit more complicated where you can create the element from scratch and destroy the element and tear it down and everything. But I'll leave it up to you to try that out. So give that a shot and then we'll take a look together. Okay, so I'm going to go with the relatively simple solution just to kind of get us warmed up as we're going through these, and I'll mention a couple of other kind of possible solutions as we go through it. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call this exercise-1.html. I'm going to copy my warm-up code just so you don't have to see me type it. Oops, I should sneak the bonus in there by accident. And I'm going to remove the, the button here. And I'm going to say exercise 1 here. All right. Now, we want a button element. And in this button, we want to say show secret. And in this case, what we want is a paragraph to kind of appear and disappear on the screen. So logically, you know, this paragraph would probably be not appearing by default, right? So let's see what we can do. I'm actually gonna, for now, actually hard code this into the HTML and kind of work on it alongside kind of explaining it. So let's see. So we wanted to say a magical portal has opened. I'm just going to copy. I'm going to copy this text because I don't want to type it. You know, have you watch me type it. I'm going to put that in here. And that is a regular paragraph, nothing fancy about it, and just a regular button, right? So just to really prove that to you, I'm going to open this in my Chrome here. I'm going to super zoom in, and there we go, right? So we have our button, we have our paragraph, and it kind of, you know, what we'd expect, but it's not really working as we'd expect. We want this to only show when we click the button and then kind of toggle on and off depending on if it's already there or not. So right now it's just there by default because we haven't really done anything to make it show or hide itself. So now the question is, well, okay, so by default, this should actually not show, right? So how do we make that happen? Well, there's multiple ways you can do this, but the easiest way that I'm just gonna kind of sneak in here, I'm just gonna add the hidden property to this, right? So this is an attribute, I should say, hidden attribute to this. So if I save this and I come back to Chrome and I refresh the page, now it's disappeared, right? Because this paragraph you can see has the hidden attribute, which is very similar to kind of display none, as you can see for the styling for the paragraph down here in the bottom. So this is actually totally hidden from the actual UI, and it's not appearing at all in the actual DOM, only the actual button is showing. So what I'm thinking is maybe I can toggle this hidden attribute on the paragraph when you click on show secret, right? So now it's hidden. When you click it, it's going to toggle it off, so it actually shows, and then toggle it on and off depending on how many times you click the button. So let's see if that works. So I want to add an event here. So I'm going to add an on click. So you know what? Actually, I'll do this differently. Up here in the title tag, or actually what I'll do at the bottom of the body, just I'll explain why in the bottom of the body. I'll add a script tag over here. I'm going to say, I'm going to fetch the button. I'm going to add an event listener dynamically to it. So I'm going to say const button is equal to document.query selector, and I'm going to grab the button element. Okay. Then I'm going to say button.add event listener. I want to add the click event listener. And what do I want to do on click? Well, I'm going to do this inline here, and we'll see kind of some differences as we get through longer code, how we can actually just refer to a function instead, and how that might be better. So in this case, I'm going to just do an inline function, and I'm going to say when you click the button, well, what do I want to do? I want to actually grab the paragraph and toggle it. Toggle a hidden property, I should say. So I'm going to say const p equals document.query selector. I'm going to grab P, and this is going to work because we only have one paragraph on the page in this case. If we didn't, we'd have to figure out another way to actually target a paragraph that might be multiple paragraphs on the page, either with an ID or a class or different kinds of selectors. But in this case, it's relatively simple for this example. And I'm going to say p.toggle attribute, right? So this is a method on a paragraph element in this case, or an HTML element. I'm going to say I want to toggle the attribute hidden, right? Which means that if it's on, turn it off, and if it's off, turn it on, right? So it's a Boolean attribute. Okay, and the reason I put the script here, you saw me kind of change my mind last minute, is generally what you want is HTML is kind of read top down, right? So we want to have all the elements defined, very similar to variables, before we actually try to grab them from the script. Otherwise, there's a chance that we might grab like null here, and this would be undefined, and because there's no button defined if we try to put the script up here in the head before we actually have a body that's defined below it, right? So there's multiple ways around this, but for now, I'll just keep it simple, and I'll just keep the script at the bottom after the definition of the button and the paragraph tag, very similar to how you would do in JavaScript in general. So let's see if this works, right? So I'm going to come back to my Chrome here. I'm going to reload the page. And I want you to take a look at this, right? The button doesn't have any on-click attribute on it, right? There's no on-click attribute like we had in the previous Warmup example. But if I click Show Secret, there we go, right? A magical portal has opened. And notice that there's no hidden property on this. Right? It's just a regular paragraph tag. I'll click Show Secret again. It's gone, but now there's a hidden property on this paragraph tag because it wasn't there before, right? So if I click it, it's gone. If I add it, then it's back. So I'm getting tripped up with myself. But we can hide it. We can show it. We can hide it. We can show it. Right? So this is a pretty simple example of how we can actually get this working. There are multiple ways to get this working. As I mentioned before, we could actually create a brand new paragraph element from scratch, insert it into the DOM, remove it from the DOM. We can keep doing that back and forth instead of trying to style it, for example. We can use different types of styling. There's all sorts of stuff that we could do here. It really depends kind of the approach you want to take in this case. So there are some pros and some cons to different approaches, but generally speaking, it doesn't really matter too much in cases like this. However, there is definitely a little bit of a performance penalty to keep inserting and removing things from the DOM if you have a really large page, and we'll see that as we go forward into other things like web components down the road. So for now, we can safely ignore that. So that actually works, right? So Show Secret, magical portal has opened, and then we can kind of toggle that on and off, and we're taking advantage of the hidden property here or attribute on the actual HTML element. Cool. So pretty awesome. Hopefully you had a similar solution, or you use styling or one of the other methods that I mentioned. Let's take a look at exercise 2. Okay. So for this one, same thing, create an HTML file with a head and a title, put some text in it, right? Probably exercise 2, for example, add a body tag. And for this one, we're gonna make it a little bit funkier. So we're gonna have a button element, and it's gonna say play on it this time. Okay, you can tell I really love my button elements. And what we want to do is when you click on play, right? So every single time, it's not just one time, right? So keep that in mind. Every single time we click on play, we want to generate a random number between 0 and 10. Okay, if the number is greater than 7, it's going to display a paragraph with the text "You're lucky." Otherwise, it's going to display a paragraph with the text "Better luck next time." So we're only going to be seeing one of these two paragraphs at a time, depending on what we actually click, what number we get when we actually click on this element. All right. So definitely a little bit more going on here, but not too much more than the previous example. And to actually kind of create these elements, there are multiple ways to go about it. You can kind of go about it with the previous example where you can show and hide it, you can add styling, or you can actually create it and remove it from the DOM entirely. So give that a shot, give it your best kind of shot to see how far you can get with that, and then we'll actually go through a solution together. Okay, so let's create a new file here. I'm going to create a file. I'm going to say exercise-2.html. And I'm just going to copy all my exercise 1 content over just so you don't see me kind of have to create all that from scratch. And I'm going to get rid of everything in there except for the title and the body and the script tag right below it. So what did we want? Well, we wanted a button element. And inside the button element, we wanted it to say play, right? Now what we want to say is, well, okay, so we have kind of 2 paragraphs that is going to show or not show depending on kind of a random number being generated. So kind of the flow of kind of events, no pun intended in this case, is that we want it when we click on the play button, right? A random number is going to be generated between 0 and 10. So generally when you're working on problems like this, it's very easy to get carried away and try to kind of put all these things together at once. But what you really want to do is kind of break this problem down into smaller subproblems and try to solve those. So I'm actually just going to focus on this part right here, just by itself, to make sure that that actually works. So when I click the play button, I'm going to generate a random number between 0 and 10. Let's see if we can get that working at the very least. So let's see how we can go about this. So I'm going to say const button equals document.querySelector button. And then what I'm going to say is, okay, well, when you click on the button, I want to execute some code, and that code is going to generate a random number and log it, in this case, to the screen, just to make sure that it actually works. So I'm going to show you something kind of cool. I'm going to create this function to generate a random number and log it to the screen. So I'm going to say const generate random number. And this is going to equal to a function. And in this case, I'm actually going to hard code it to generate a random number between 0 and 10. So I'm going to say const random is equal to math.floor of math.random. And we've done this multiple times in kind of the JavaScript series and in previous videos as well. So if this looks a little bit confusing to you, definitely kind of take a look at how you generate a random number. What we're doing here is we're using math.random to generate a random number between 0 and 1 using the kind of built-in JavaScript math library. And then we're using floor to actually cut off the decimal there, so we actually get a nice round number. So in this case, if I multiply it by 10, what I should get is kind of a random number between, I think in this case by 11, I should get a random number between 0 and 10 inclusive, I believe. I always mess this up, so if I did this wrong, please please let me know in the comments. My mind doesn't work as well with these random numbers when I'm doing it on the fly for some reason, but I think that's right. So we want to generate a random number, multiply it by kind of 11 in this case, so 10, the max that we want, plus 1. So this is going to include 0, and then math.floor it so that we chop off the decimal. Then what I want to do is I want to console.log out this random number. If I did 10, I believe I would only get 0 to 9. But let's see, not the end of the world. So then what I want to do is I want to add this function as kind of what gets executed when we click on the button, right? And there's multiple ways to do this. I'm going to show you kind of one interesting way. So I'm going to say button.onClick. Right, so I'm assigning to the onClick property of the button, just because we saw a couple other methods before. We saw the attribute for onClick in the HTML. We saw the add event listener method in the JavaScript. And this is actually assigning to the property of the object for the DOM object, which is also going to set the attribute correctly as well. So I'm going to say button.onClick is equal to generate random number. Now, take a look at this. This is kind of tricky, right? Because I'm not actually executing this function here. Okay, I want to actually tell the onClick listener that this is the function I want you to go to when you get clicked, and you're going to execute it at that time. Because if I actually put a call to the function right here, this is actually going to run the function and assign the result of that function, or the return value of that function, to the onClick. But I don't want to do that because this function is returning undefined. I want to return the actual function itself to onClick, so that onClick can then go and call that value. So let's see if this works. So if in theory, when we click on this button, if all goes according to plan, we should see a random number being generated and logged to the actual terminal. So if I open this and I double click on it and I kind of super zoom in here, and moment of truth, I open my inspector and I go over to the console and I click on this, I get 9, click on it 1, 0. Let's see if I can get like, do I get a 10 at some point? There we go, we got a 10. Okay, I think you can see that, right? So I think I did the math correctly there, 0 and then all the way to 10. You know, maybe if I did it wrong, I get an 11. I'm pretty sure that's right, 0 to 10. Cool, so that actually works pretty well. So if I go over to the Elements tab and I look at the button, we can see, actually in this case, the onClick is actually not being assigned to the attribute just because of specifically how that property is working with regards to a function being kind of stringified in this case. So what we'll see is if I go over to the event listeners tab here, if you have that in the bottom of Chrome and you use a click, you can see that the button actually has an event listener on it. And then the handler down here has a name of generate random number. You can probably see it's kind of cut off on my head there. I'll kind of scroll down a little bit, but you can actually see a lot of information there on the events. And as I mentioned in the previous video, we're going to look at things like capturing and event delegation and bubbling and all that kind of stuff in the next video. So here we have a button, and we dynamically added to its onClick property the ability to generate random numbers, right? Which is pretty darn awesome. Now, the next step is to actually, well, let's read the next step just so we don't forget. If the number is greater than 7, it's going to display a paragraph with the text "You're lucky." Otherwise, it's going to display a paragraph with the text "Better luck next time." Okay, so let's think about a couple of ways we can do this. And honestly, there's so many ways you can do this. I'm just going to go with kind of probably off the top of my head. I actually didn't code this before. I just kind of wrote it and thought about it, but I haven't actually coded this yet. So I'm just going to go with like the easiest possible method in my head right now. So I'm going to kind of go with what we had before and mention another alternative as well on the side. So I'm going to create a paragraph here and create 2 paragraphs. And I think one said "You're lucky" and one said "Better luck next time." So one's going to say "You're lucky." I should probably use the actual entity codes there, but that's fine. And we're going to say "Better luck next time." All right. Now, I'm going to actually set these both as hidden to start. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to say that this one is going to have an ID and this one's also going to have an ID, right? This one is going to be, let's just say you win. And then this one, let's just going to say you lose. Okay, so these are both going to kind of be in the DOM and they're going to be hidden. And I'm going to assign them IDs, and I'm going to actually toggle this very similar to the previous example, depending on what we generate with our random number. So in here, generate random number, in this function, what I'm going to say is if the random number is greater than 7, then I want to do something, right? So this is the win case. Otherwise, I want to do something else. And this is the lose case. Okay, so what do I want to do if we win? Well, I want to grab the "You're lucky" and actually toggle it to show, right? So let's try this. So I'm going to say const lucky, lucky is equal to document.querySelector. I guess we'll say hashtag win. So that's going to grab the paragraph with a ID of win. And then in here, I'm going to say lucky dot, I'll say toggle attribute, and I'll do hidden. Okay, and I'll save that, and hopefully that works. Otherwise, if we lose, what I want to do is I'm going to say const lose, and we're probably going to start seeing issues with this as I actually show this to you, but let's take it one step at a time. I'm going to copy this over here, document.querySelector, and instead of win, this is going to be grabbing the lose. And what I want to do with that is if you lose, I'm going to say lose.toggle attribute hidden. All right, so that in theory should work, right? So we're generating a random number, we're logging out as well for now, just for debugging. If it's greater than 7, which should happen, I guess, like 20% of the time, 8, 9, or 10, I guess that's like 30%. My math is really off today. Then we want to toggle the hidden property. And since it starts off as hidden, this is going to show this element, right? And the same is going to be true for lose if you kind of get below that. So most of the time, you're actually going to toggle the better luck next time. So let's come back to Chrome. I'm going to reload this page. And we're going to see that these 2 elements indeed are here in the actual DOM. And if I kind of click on play, let's see what happens. You can click play. I'm going to get 5, right, which is less than 7. I'm going to get better luck next time showing on the screen. And I'm going to see that hidden is no longer a property on this paragraph tag. Okay, great. So now let's see what happens. So here's probably the bug that you might have noticed. So I click play again, I'm gonna get 2, and it disappears. Okay, so that's not really what we want, and it kind of makes sense what's happening here because now we're toggling hidden back on. So my logic actually doesn't work in this case. So what we want to do is not actually toggle the attribute. We want to really say that if you get 7, what we're really trying to say, or higher than 7, we want to show this, and we want to make sure this is hidden, right? If you lose, we want to make sure that this is hidden and this shows no matter what, right? So let's think about this. So if you win, right? So if you get 8, 9, or 10, we're gonna grab lucky, and which is so grab win, which is this one, and we want to display it for sure, right? We don't want to kind of toggle it. We want to make sure that the display is set to be not hidden. So okay, so what we can do is let's think about removing or adding hidden and removing hidden depending on kind of what we're doing here. So if we have 8, 9, or 10, we want to make sure that lucky is shown no matter what. So we're gonna say lucky dot we're gonna say remove attribute hidden. Okay, so if this doesn't have the attribute hidden, this is actually going to do pretty much nothing, which is fine. If it does have the attribute hidden, it's going to actually show it, right? So that's kind of makes sense. I think that's pretty good for that one. If we lose, what we want to do is we want to make sure we kind of do the same thing, right? We want to say lose, and I'm going to copy remove attribute here and paste it over here. Instead of toggle attribute, I want to make sure we remove the hidden attribute off of lose. Now, there's still an issue with this, which we're going to see shortly, but let me save this and head back to Chrome, and I'm going to reload the page over here, and these are both hidden. I'm going to clear my console. I'll click play, and I get a 2. Better luck next time. All right, that works just as expected. Click play again. All right, I got another 2, not as little, like a 10% chance, I guess. And I get better luck next time, so it seems to actually work, right? So click play one more time. 5, still working. 6, still working. 3, come on. 8, interesting. Okay, so what's happening is now we're having, if we get a winning, we're actually gonna kind of show both because we're never actually removing or adding back the hidden property, like removing the fact that it's in the DOM. So if I click play again and I get 0, now you're going to see that your luck is actually staying here, right? And we only should be seeing better luck next time. So we kind of have half of the problem fixed, but not the other half yet. So let's come back in here. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that not only are we removing the kind of making sure that this is showing for lucky, we also want to make sure that this is actually hidden, right? So what I'm going to do here is a bit of kind of janky looking code just to show you how kind of wacky this stuff can get if you're not careful with kind of how you're writing this code. I'm going to make some suggestions how we can improve this towards the end. So I'm going to copy this code right here that I have in the else clause. I'm going to come up in here and I'm going to paste it. Now, some of you are cringing when I do this, and that's the correct reaction. If you ever find yourself copying and pasting code, just like you saw me do, something is probably wrong. Not always, but most of the time. But bear with me while we do this. We'll keep it as simple as possible for now. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that lose is going to be hidden. Right? So we can't toggle hidden on this case because we don't actually know what it might be. So we're gonna, instead of we're gonna do set attribute instead of remove attribute. We want to set attribute hidden. Set attribute is a bit weird. We have to give it an actual value, otherwise it's not gonna work properly. So in this case, I'm gonna give it an empty string, which is actually should suffice for a Boolean value like this anyways. But it's just kind of a little quirk with how set attribute works. And we want to actually do the reverse with the lose condition. So I'm going to copy the lucky element code here. I'm going to paste it down here, and I'm going to say dot set attribute hidden, and this is going to be an empty string. So let's kind of read through this really quick just so it makes sense. We're going to generate a random number between 0 and 10. I'm going to log it out. If we win this game, right, we're in this case right here, right? We are going to make sure that the lucky paragraph, which is the winning paragraph, gets shown by removing hidden if it is already on there. And we're going to make sure that the losing element for the paragraph is hidden by setting its attribute to be hidden, basically the opposite of remove attribute, right? We're setting the attribute. And we're doing the reverse for the lose condition with the paragraphs. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's save that and head back to Chrome. I'm going to reload the page and let's take a look at our elements. Both are hidden. I'm going to go to my console. I'm going to click on play. I get a 5. Better luck next time. All right. I get a 10. There we go, right? You're lucky. And then you saw that the actual better luck next time disappeared. And I click play and get a 2, better luck next time. And if we go to the elements tab, we'll see that one is hidden, in this case, the win, because we're losing right now with our lower score. And if I come back here and I click on play, come on, there we go, 8. And we come back on here, you can see that now the lose is the one that has the hidden property and the paragraph has a win. So paragraph has, with the win, has a no hidden on it. So arguably a bit overly complicated for this particular example. What we could have done is also removed and added elements to the DOM. We could have used styling, but I just wanted to show you that even something as trivial sounding as this can actually get kind of complicated. Now, there's many other possible solutions, as I mentioned before. But before I go to the third exercise, I really want to emphasize kind of why this code is really bad, okay? There's many reasons why this code is bad, and I purposely wanted to put this in here so you can actually see me struggle to get to the solution and then even critique it after we get to the solution. And I think you should get in the habit of doing this as you go through your own code. So rule number 1, if you're copying and pasting stuff, probably bad, right? Again, not always, but probably bad. So why is that bad? Well, you can see that if I wanted to kind of change stuff with this lucky and removing and adding things, I'd have to do it now in 2 different places, right? But that's kind of annoying, right? Like in this case, I'm getting this lucky element over here. I'm also getting it over here. Not ideal, right? Same thing, the lose element, getting it over here, getting it over here, right? Probably makes more sense to grab it once up front and then manipulate it later on. Right? So we can actually just search for that element one time in the DOM, maybe out here somewhere, just like we had for our button. And then we can actually just manipulate it down over here. Okay. Now, the other thing that's kind of an issue is that, maybe it makes sense to actually take the code inside of these blocks and actually make a function out of it, right? If there's enough going on, maybe it makes sense to be like generate win condition or generate lose condition or something. And we can put some of the code inside of there instead so that it's a bit more clear for someone reading, because you can imagine as this function maybe will grow over time and there's more complexity added, we really want to make sure that only the very core things in this function need to be in here. And having more functions, generally speaking, especially if you start to get really long functions like this, is probably a better idea. Also, you probably noticed that this function originally was called generate random number. It's definitely not doing that anymore, right? It's generating a random number, but it's also doing a bunch of other stuff. And that's that kind of goes back to what I was just saying. If we really want to make sure that we're doing kind of this other stuff, maybe in a different function, we can maybe call that and change the name of the function here, but it probably makes more sense just to actually call both this function and another function together in kind of in sequence. Like we did in the kind of previous video. So a lot of considerations to make, and there's even more than that, but just at a high level, hopefully that kind of gives you an understanding of kind of some things you could look for to improve this code. And if you wrote this yourself and slightly differently, definitely look for ways to optimize it and make it a bit more readable for yourself as well. Okay, let's go to exercise number 3. So for this one, I want you to create an HTML file again, have a head in it with a title, with some text, as well as a body tag. And in this one, I want you to have an input element. Okay, so we're going to move away from our button. And this input is going to be a regular kind of input that you type text in, okay, which should be the default for the browser. when you type inside of this element, I want the same text to appear that you're typing in this box to appear below this input element inside a paragraph element. So if I'm typing like hello, like HEL, HEL should be appearing as I'm typing them inside a paragraph element below the input box. And I want you to color that text in blue just to make it a little bit more colorful as well. So as you're typing in the box, blue text that appears that you're typing in the box should appear right below it as well. So you're probably going to want to look on MDN to see what kind of event you want to use to actually make this work efficiently, or Google or Stack Overflow and things like that. So I'll leave that up to you, but give that a shot and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so I'll create a new file here. I'll call this exercise-3.html, and I'm just going to come back to my, let's go with my warm-up. I'm going to copy all of that and I'm going to paste it in here. And I'm going to say that this is, I don't remember if I renamed my other one, exercise 3. Did I rename this one? Exercise 2, I did. Interesting. All right, so in here, what I want to do is we no longer want a button. We want an input element. And after this input element, what we want is a paragraph element. And to start, there's going to be nothing inside of this paragraph because it's just kind of going to be empty because the input by default, at least the way that we have it right now, has no text inside of it. So we're going to add a script tag down here. And now we can actually write our code. So let me just open this in the browser just to make sure we're actually kind of had this all set up for ourselves. I'm going to double click on this, super zoom in here, and then open this in my inspector. And there we go. We have our input element. We have an empty paragraph element right below it. And I can kind of type in this input just fine. Great. So now we want to make it so that when you type in this input, the same text appears inside this paragraph. So let's go to Google and search how we can actually do that. So we're going to say event for input typing, I guess, text. Like, this is not really English, but let's just kind of go with that. So HTML element input event. Is that the right one? I don't actually know. Let's click on that just to see kind of what it's talking about. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Input event values, input element has been changed. Okay. Applies to elements with content editable. Not really sure what that's going on about. Input elements with checkbox or radio should fire whenever you toggle. Okay. So there's an input event. So that's interesting. I also know from kind of previous experience that there's kind of a text event as well. So let's see if we can kind of look at that. But maybe we can start with the input event, but we'll take a look at that. So or a change event, I should say. So I'm going to say input HTML change event. I'm going to kind of compare these. So if we look at this, we're going to say a change event is fired for input selecting text area, very similar to the input one, when they modify the event value. Unlike the input event, the change event is not necessarily fired for each alteration to an element's value. That's kind of curious, right? So that kind of doesn't seem like what we want, right? Depending on the kind of event being changed and the way the user interacts with the element, the change event fires at different moments. So there's kind of all this information about kind of when it fires and the difference between this input and this change event. And there's also other events. Actually, if you look at the event reference, there's things like key up and key press and all that kind of stuff and touchdown. So really, it's kind of, you have to figure out what you're using this input box for and actually kind of make this event based on that. So I'm actually going to go with what I created first, or what I looked up first, which is the input event. And you can definitely use the change event. It actually has a little blurb right here as to what the change and input event difference is a little bit as well. So let's go with input and maybe change it to change if we need. So for now, I'll let you read that as well, just so that you can have more information for the future as you create your input events. So I'm going to say const input is equal to document.querySelector input. And I'm going to add an event listener. So I'm going to say input dot on input, right? So I'm going to just use the same kind of method as before. And I'm just going to create an arrow function here. And what we're going to say is I'm going to grab the paragraph element. So I'm going to say const p equals document.querySelector p. And to actually kind of act on what I said before, I'm actually going to move this up. This p is going to exist. I'm not going to kind of delete it and remove it. I'm just going to have it changed. So I don't need to keep asking for it every single time. I'm just going to have one reference to it so I can actually not have to search for it every single time the input changes. So then what I want to say is, okay, well, I need to figure out how I can get the text inside of this box, right? So, well, let's think about this. We want to actually grab the content inside of this box. So I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to actually console log the entire input element and see what happens when we actually key press or in this case, input or change on this input element. So I'm going to come back to my browser here. I'm going to go back to my exercise 3. I'm going to reload the page. And I'm going to go to my console and start clicking in here. I'm going to start typing ASDF. Okay, so it looks like it's actually working, right? So the input kind of event is actually firing, and we're getting the input element logged out to the console, which is nice. But this is actually logging out the actual elements because of how Chrome is working in the debugger. So instead of this, as I showed you before, there's a trick we can do, which is console.dir, which actually allows us to look at the directory for this, which is logging out the actual object keys and values in a nice kind of format for us. If I switch back after saving this and I reload the page and I start typing in here, ASD, you can see that now I can actually open this up and take a look at what's inside. So if I do that, let's look to see if we can find out which property has this ASD inside of it. So scrolling down, a whole bunch of stuff over here. Don't see ASD anywhere. Okay. I see the tag name, which we've seen before, a whole bunch of styling information, all the different events, kind of running out of options here. Are we ever going to get to it? And there we go. All right. So right at the bottom here, value. Okay, so value is the property on this input element that we can actually grab this ASD value off of. Interesting. So let's see if we can actually log that out. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to say input. We saw dot value, right? So I'm just going to switch this to a log of input dot value, right? So I'm going to grab this elements dot value property, which is what we just saw, which is this one right here. And I'm going to reload the page. And if I start typing A, all right, S, all right, DF, nice, there we go, right? Hello, perfect. So we have it actually being captured. And I do want to mention, for those of you that have seen this before, you're probably thinking, oh, Natter, there's another way you can do this. You can actually grab it off of the event object, which we'll get to later, because that is part of the bonus exercises. So for now, I just want to show you that this is another way we can actually do this as well. And kind of there's kind of different pros and cons to both of these approaches. So we have the actual value. Well, we're actually pretty much almost done, right? What we want to do is I want to say the P, which is the paragraph element, dot, I'll say text content, right, is equal to this input dot value, right? I want to set the text content of the paragraph tag, which is the text node inside the paragraph tag, to be the value of what's being typed. And I'll still log it out for now just for debugging purposes. We still have to set it to be blue, but if I kind of come back here one step at a time, Chrome, refresh the page, right? I start typing in here, I'll do hello. Look at that. Hello there. Super awesome, right? So this is actually showing in this paragraph element. And if I open this up, we can see that in this paragraph tag, indeed, we have hello there being shown, which is super cool. So let me switch back in here. How do we set this to be blue? Well, we can kind of set the styling in this case to be blue. So I can say P dot, we can kind of do a whole bunch of things here, but I can say P dot, dot style dot color is equal to blue. Right, so I'm using the kind of property initialization syntax in this case instead of the attribute directly. And if I come back in here and I reload the page, kind of once and for all, let's see what happens. We're going to say, I love monkeys. Look at that. Amazing. All right. Super cool, right? So as we're typing in this input box, we're actually getting the values right away down here as well, which is really, really awesome. I hope you found that one interesting. Okay, now I couldn't help myself. I actually had to add a whole bunch of bonus questions in this case. I actually added 2 because I think I got too excited as well. So let's go through these together because there are actually some new features with events that we didn't actually get a chance to see in the previous video together. So let's start with bonus exercise 1. Now, Take your time with this. If you haven't done this before, this is definitely going to take a bit of research and a bit of playing to see if you get it working or not. There actually is an argument that gets passed to our event handler function by default. And that's what I was kind of hinting at earlier. We can actually have an easier method to get access to kind of what is happening with these events than having to kind of reach into different DOM elements like we saw with the input. And I want you to see if you can actually grab this kind of argument, like what is it, how does it work, and what are the properties that it might have. And interestingly is, I want you to check is if there's a different type of element that has different type of event, for example, a click event versus a change event versus an input event versus a mouse over event, right? Is there a different kind of event properties that show up on that object depending on the event type? Now for this, you definitely want to look up on MDN and Google to see if you can figure a bit about this out. I left it purposely vague so you can spend some time looking it up and looking at examples and testing it out yourself. But see if you can actually code up a quick example once you have this working to see if you can actually prove that it works. So give that a shot and see if you can answer these, and then we'll take a look together. Okay, so I'm going to kind of come in here. I'm going to copy my warmup, and I'm going to create a new file. I'll call this bonus-1.html. Paste this in here. And I'll say this is my bonus exercise 1. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to create a button in here. And I'm going to say, click me. Okay. And I'm below it, I'm going to add a script tag. And I'm going to say const button is equal to document.querySelector button. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Okay. So I'm just going to open this really quick just so I have it ready so I can actually show you. I'm going to take a look at MDN shortly. So I was kind of mentioning that the event, right? When we click on this, we actually get an object. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to say button, and I'm going to say dot on click in this case is equal to a function. I'm going to say console.log. I'll say clicked. Now, what I'm claiming is that there's actually an argument that we actually invisibly, right, automatically get passed here that we can access if we want to. So let's take a look at what that might all be about. So if I come back to Google, I'm going to say kind of like event object HTML. I'm not actually sure kind of what to look at here. So let's just kind of Google that. I'm going to look at MDN down here, the event. Okay, so talking about events, you can listen for different events. It talks all about that. There's add event listener in here. Might look at that. It's kind of going through a list of different events. Okay, so that's not too helpful. It's going on about bubbling and capturing as well, which we're going to go through in the next video. I'm going to look at add event listener down here. So if we look at add event listener, it's an interface. We already seen this a little bit before. And we can see that we can add event listener, which is the click, for example, and then the listener. Then there's some things that we saw that we didn't actually get a chance to actually use options and use capture. But if I kind of scroll down further here, we can see an example. So there are different pages on MDN and across the web that you can actually look at for different explanations of this, but this is going to suffice kind of for our example right now. Now, what this is saying is that we can pass a callback function. So we already know that, right? That's what we're doing right here. We're passing a callback function to onClick, which is this function right here. So when the button gets clicked, call this function back and actually execute it. Okay, so that's fine. But take a look at this. We're actually saying that the callback here accepts a single parameter, right? And this is an object based on the event, describing the event that it has occurred, and it returns nothing. All right, so in this case, you can see that they're using an event handler, and they're actually using this kind of event argument right here. So it looks like this is an object that has different properties on it. So that's kind of interesting. So let's switch back here and let's try it out. So I'm going to say in here, I'm going to have an event. And again, the name of this doesn't matter at all, right? Some people like to use E, some people use event, some people use something totally different. It's just a regular function argument. Whatever we give it, it's going to be a placeholder for whatever gets passed to us automatically, implicitly by the event handler code. So if I console.log out this event, let's see what happens. Okay, so we're gonna see if this gets passed to us, and if it does, if we log it out, is it going to be undefined or is there going to be something in there? Okay, So let's switch back here. I'm going to go back to my bonus exercise. I'm going to reload my page. And I'm going to click on this. That's kind of interesting, right? It looks like we have a pointer event, right? And over here, we have all sorts of kind of funky looking stuff. We have an altitude angle, like we're doing some kind of physics here. We've got a client X, client Y. We have offsets. We have a whole bunch of really interesting kind of properties that we can use to figure out kind of what this event was. You can see pointer type is mouse in this case, which is kind of cool as well. A whole bunch of really cool information in here, right? And we have sub objects in here. We can actually see the actual button element as part of it that actually got clicked, and the target as well, which we'll look at in the next video. So that's kind of cool. Now that kind of makes sense for a pointer event, right? Maybe I can actually do something depending on where you clicked on the screen, and I can actually grab information based on that. So that's fine. So let's try something else here. If I come back here to VS Code, maybe let's add an input element, right? And let's do the same thing here. I'm gonna kind of copy this code here. I'm gonna just paste it. I know I said not to copy and paste code, but just to speed up this video for you a little bit, I'm gonna change this to be an input. I'm going to change all these to be an input here, right? So I'm going to say constant input, document query selector input. I'm going to say input.onClick. Instead of onClick, I'm going to say on input, right? And that's it. I'm just going to say, actually say input event, I guess, right? And we're going to log to see if this event here for changing the input or typing into the input for some reason is a little bit different than the pointer event that we got in this case. So I'm going to save that. Okay, I'm going to switch back to Chrome here. I'm going to reload the page. Now, note, I'm just going to leave the log up here from previously. This is the pointer event, right, from previously. Now, if I click in here and I start typing, take a look at that, right? We have an input event now. And if I open this up and I scroll through this, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different types of properties in here that are different from the property that we got from our actual input event. You can actually even see that there's a data property in this case, which actually has the letter that's being typed, right? So if I type like hello, right? Let me just say hello T, for example. You can see that we actually are getting the T in this case, right? So that's kind of cool. So we're actually getting the letter that's being typed, but we're not actually getting the full value. So it turns out that this is actually nested in this object down in the target. But the point of this exercise is to actually show you that there's different event types. In this case, this is an input event type, right? And this is a pointer event type, right? There are so many different event types. And if we come back here to MDN and I kind of go back on the screen to a previous page, you can see, like, look at all these events, right? Just look at all of them. That's a crazy amount of events, right? There's in fact quite a lot of new events that we can use, from things like mousing over, touch events, and window sizing events, and, like, you know, if we're switching tabs and all that kind of stuff. There's all sorts of really, really advanced stuff. We can even detect really awesome things like you know, things being plugged into the computer or the different kind of software and you know, VR and all that kind of stuff that has their own events as well. And these are being updated all the time as the web gets evolved and new features actually start coming out that we can actually integrate with, which is super, super cool. So I highly encourage you to play around with these and actually get more familiarity with the different types of events, so you can actually at least have an understanding of the different types of properties that might be inside of these. Okay. Now, I want to show you one more bonus. I know this is quite a long video before we call it a wrap for this video. So here it is. Very, very simple, kind of innocuous looking bonus here. Just kind of one line, or two lines in this case. I want you to take a look at what this object is inside these event handler functions. We looked at the this context and the this object in depth in the JavaScript series. So if you're not familiar with how the this keyword works in JavaScript, definitely take a look at that so you can actually understand kind of what the purpose of this particular exercise is about. Hence why it's a bonus as well, because it's a bit more advanced to understand how the this context works in the case of the DOM. But what you'll see is that it actually makes a lot of sense what's actually happening once you actually investigate this. So log it out, take a look at what you can find out about this object, and try it out on different elements and see how it works. Okay, so to wrap this up, I'm going to grab my bonus one over here. I'm just going to do, I'm going to create a new file here. I'll call this bonus-2.html. I'm going to paste all this in from my bonus one. I normally don't like to do copying and pasting, but just to save you some time. And over here, I'm going to just kind of remove the code I have in my input and in my button, just so that you can actually see kind of the skeleton of this. So I actually have the same code for my bonus one, right? I have my button, which says click me, and then the input type as well. And I'm actually grabbing the button in the script as well as the input and adding an onClick and an onInput event to them. I'll just save this really quick and I'll open this in my browser just so that we can actually see visually that really this is the exact same thing. And I'll open my console here on the side as well, so we can actually see that that's right there. Perfect. Now, what I want to show you is that there actually is a this value that we can actually access. So check this out, no pun intended. I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to log this. Interesting. Now, is this going to work? Let's take a look. So what is this is really the question, right? So I'm going to check when I click on this button, what is the this value going to be in the context of the DOM? So if I save that and I come back to Chrome and I reload this page and I go to my console, I'll click the button. Interesting. So I get window. And if I open up window, we've seen this before, right? Window is all of this kind of stuff that actually has all the stuff that we're looking at right now, all the different DOM APIs, as well as many other things in JavaScript as well, all inside there. So in the DOM, by default in the global context, this actually refers to the window object. In things like Node.js, it really depends on kind of how you're running it, but most of the time it's just undefined. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So maybe we can bind this value and let's see what happens. So as you recall, the actual this value doesn't get bound by arrow functions, right? So maybe I can turn this into a regular function and see if I can actually bind to this value to actually see if there's a change here. So I'm going to say function event. I'm going to change this from an arrow function to a regular function, right? That's all I did. I just changed this from an arrow function to a regular function declaration using the function keyword, and I got rid of the arrow. Okay, and console log this is still in there. I'm going to save that, come back in here, reload the page. I'll leave this console up here from before. I'll click the click me and take a look at that. This is totally awesome. In fact, in order to understand this, there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes, and you really have to be comfortable with how this context actually works in JavaScript. But what's happening in this case is we're actually binding this value to what's calling us, which is the button in this case, instead of the actual window object, which is what we default to as this value in the global context in the DOM. So the way to think about this is it's this button that is actually calling this function for us, which is why it's kind of the thing before the dot that is calling this function for us. And it's in the context of that button that we are running this code. So the context for this in that case is actually going to be the button element. So the question is then, well, is that true for everything? So if I come down here and I change this to a function declaration as well for the input, and I do a console.log of this, let's take a look if that's true for the input. So I'll save that, come back in here, reload the page. I'll click the button. Okay, so I get the button. I'll type in here and look at that. I get the input, right? So I can actually access the element itself through this value as well. We can also access the element through the actual event as well if we want to. But this is actually quite important to understand how this binding actually works with regards to elements, because when we're actually looking at things like these events in technologies like React and others, this can get quite confusing. No pun intended. It's always really funny when we're talking about this keyword in JavaScript. And you really want to make sure that you're trying to figure out, do you need to bind to this value? Do you not need to bind to this value? Do you use an arrow function? Do you use a regular function? How does all this work in the context of this value if you ever do need it? So that was a lot of fun going through these different exercises. I hope you found it just as valuable and fun and exciting as I did. What we're going to be doing in the next video together is going over kind of and the next topic with events. And we're going to be talking about bubbling, capturing, as well as a really fancy and awesome topic called event delegation that's extremely powerful and important to know so we don't end up adding too many different events to our actual page and slowing down the performance. I can't wait to get to those topics. I'll see you in that video. See you later.